identified as the two parts of the esoteric Buddhist mandala, the Ryobukai. So that's the womb world mandala and the diamond world mandala. There is always this analogy system in Japanese Shingon Buddhism where one thing stands for another, and finally everything is a manifestation of the cosmic Buddha. And these are the two mandalas. And then these are the patriarchs, or some of them. So in the center, that's Keika, and then Kukai. So according to this, the 4 characters Daishi Myojin comprise a secret mandala. In one's daily life, one should put it in one's mind and chant it when one has fear in the evil world, and when one last closes one's eyes, which is a euphemism for death, one should chant this name mantra. So it's a god, and it's also a mantra. So you can see the place where the possession happened, Henmyoin, is gone completely. The god, Daishi Myojin, is extinct. No one's heard of him. He disappeared probably around the 15th century, 15th or 16th century. And the text itself does not survive. The original text has never been found. It's been reconstructed from copies, the earliest of which is 14th century, and in segments as well. So the entire project is extremely elusive. But let's now talk about the why of the text and its historical context. And it's here that the god, or the kami, and the figures, the monastic figures connected with this text, become clearer. As you may recall from the list of contents, the first section deals with the disturbance between the two temples. These two temples were both at Koyasan, Kongo-Buji and Daiden-Boen, and they had been locked in conflict for about 2 centuries. Daiden-Boen had fantastic patronage from members of the imperial family. It had estates given to it. It was favoured by one of the great emperors. It had a lot of money. It was producing a lot of texts. It had a very powerful founder called Kakuban, who was introducing new practices that were not really traditional to Kukai's teachings. And it was a major threat to Kongo-Buji, which was much older. And it also had managed to take over some of the estates that were owned by Kongo-Buji. So they were having a fight for quite a long time. They did not like each other at all, and they would do terrible things to each other. One incident was the robe ripping incident, which was when Kongo-Buji monks burst into a scholarly ceremony of the Daiden-Boen monks and ripped their robes off them and ripped them up because they were not considered the conservative traditional robes. And they both complained about each other a lot. But it's not just, I don't think it was just to do with money and power, it was also to do with scholarship, because at Koyasan, having good scholars holding great debate assemblies on the doctrines was a sign of prestige. It attracted more patronage. I mean, these things were linked together, but they were both very, very proud of their scholarship and their teaching. The culmination of this was what had happened here in 1242, and it was an arson attack by Kongo-Buji on Daiden-Boen's temples and residential halls. All of the Daiden-Boen monks were forced out of the mountain at that time, and all the best scholar monks of Kongo-Buji were sent away. I have, for a long time, been puzzled by the disjunct between the opening section of this text, the Takisenki, and then the 9 parts afterwards, which are largely on shamanic practices of possession, soul retrieval, these secret teachings, magical foxes, mysterious snakes, and so on. But you may be able to foretell my resolution of this. Exile or spirit loss or retrieval were already connected in a very old narrative and in an older reality, such as the poem cycles I earlier mentioned. As we examine the accounts of the violence and arson attack, from now on, you may find yourself seeing it as a cynical justification through sacralization of plain crime and violence. But I want to argue against this. The Kongo Buji monks who wrote this, they were terrified of losing their knowledge of esoteric Buddhism, which they thought had come directly from Kukai and through an unbroken lineage transmission, which was also oral and was also secret. Some of it was written down, but a lot of it was oral, or they would write teachings on kirigami, which are just little strips of paper with short teachings and messages on them. And they would lose this through rivalry and rival knowledge represented by Daidenboen monks, and also by losing their greatest scholar monks to exile. And in fact, 2 monks had already died by the time the Takisenki was written. Both teaching and spirits would be left to wander and dissipate. And so I see this section as a representation of desperation to retain embodied truths, and it's no coincidence that the monks concerned with its production and those exiled were what we can call them shamans. They practiced mountain religions, mountain ascetic practices. And of course, as the text itself being a product of an oracular possession, they understood spirit possession and soul summoning and soul retrieval. It's also no coincidence that the text occurs in tandem with an uptick in the production of textualized teachings. And these are called shogyo, which literally means sacred texts. They're non-canonical Buddhist texts, new texts, sometimes found. They would be discovered in strange places and attributed to Kukai or some other past master. But they came from different sources than the canon. And they were kept within lineages, so they were building their own libraries. But this increased so much in the 13th century that it's later been called Shogyo Shigi, which means something like sacred works ism. And they were proliferating, of course, with the lineages, because the lineages all wanted to have their own Shogyo. And this Takisenki was also considered a Shogyo, too. So there's this move from embodied knowledge, which is oral, into locking it down into texts. So I want to read some of this section now and point up the treatment of violence and exile in esoteric Shingon Buddhism. So at the very beginning, they describe these disputes and they say, we decided to punish the evil hearts of the Denboen monks. They don't call them Dai Denboen because Dai means great, and this is a biased account. Denboen went up in flames. This was the punishment. The scholar monks of Kongo Buji settled through council that this was the will of the gods. It was said at the meeting that the bows and arrows of Aizen Myo, which is a very powerful divinity worshipped in Shingon Buddhism, were borrowed. It was said that a punishment should be dealt to the bad monks of Denboen. The fire, which was actually arson, right, was an Aizen or Goma, a fire ritual. It was not a human act. The original vow, this is a little unclear, so it's my translation, but the original vow of Aizen had been violated, so the hearth was pulled out. Thus, the Shuto, or the scholar monks of this temple, only added altar wood to the Aizen or Goma. It should be thought of as the flames of Aizen Myo's samadhi, his meditative state. So this is all being recast. They're talking about the major ritual in Shingon Buddhism, which is the Gomagyo, fire ritual, recasting arson as a sacred act and saying we just added some wood to the fire. It's not human. And they say that they settled through council that this was the will of the gods. This was also fairly conventional. At other large, powerful Buddhist institutions of the time had similar meetings where they would settle their decisions by consulting the gods in some way. Aizen Myo features large in the Takisenki, and especially in the opening passage, as well as his magical arrows, his bows and arrows, and his fire. So they say, as I say, they say that the flames are the kasho sanmai. This is the heat that's emitted from the body in a state of deep meditation, deep meditative focus. But this fire also burns demonic influences on the outside, and it was used in a special rite for dispelling enemies and baleful forces. But Aizen was especially connected to this enemy dispelling in the 13th century because his bows and arrows were symbolically used by the monk Eison to ritually dispel the invasions of the troops of the Yuan dynasty. He tried to invade Japan twice. In fact, the bow and arrow were conceptually linked to the divine wind that created a typhoon to drive away the invaders, the origin of the term kamikaze, or divine wind, better known today from more recent wars. But here, the enemies are those of Kongo-Buji and of Kukai's original teachings, as they saw them threatened by Daidenboen's newfangled theories. And in the same period, a new form of Aizen appeared, merged with the usually more central Fudomyo. They go together in this period. This is completely non-canonical. You can't find this in any canonical Buddhist texts. It was a Japanese invention. They joined Fudo and Aizen together with two heads to make this doubly powerful divinity. And then later on in the... Oh, also please note down here, the two, they're called doji, they're kind of spirit children, magical children, and chigo, these children in temples who were prone to possession, are related to these magical children. Children and women, of course, because in another sense they had porous boundaries or were somehow more innocent or cut off from society or particularly prone to possession. Yeah. So you can see a closer detail there. This painting actually is called a two-headed Aizen, but it's clear that it's Fudo on one side. He has a very distinctive braid hanging down. This is from Koya-san, from the same period. This is also from Koya-san, from a shrine which protects Koya-san nearby.